You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 28th of February 2014. UK provides £6.5 million fees for 250,000 Zimbabwe pupils. What the hell, vote approves visa-free travel to Europe for Emiratis. Empty property in EU could house all of Europe's homeless and more. Germany sees threat from returning Syria militants. French woman wins right to marry dead fiancé. Nigeria's Boko Haram blamed for Adamawa killings. Thought for the day, Cuckoos and Cloud Cuckoo land, do you live there? And finally, Friday 2 for 1 day, pest control and mortgages. Now before the news, a comment on the sentencing of the two cretinous Muslim killers of young Lee Rigby. Michael Adebolajo, 29, will die in jail after being given a whole life sentence, while Michael Adebowale, 22, was sentenced to life with a minimum of 45 years. The one wrong thing Judge Sweeney said was that they had betrayed Islam, and the one thing that these two horrendously badly behaved men said was that it was not a betrayal of Islam, and it was not. That act was Islamic, tooth and claw, and in its fundamental form, in the hands of radicalised idiots out of their own country and culture. Referring to Britain, Adebowale screamed, "You and America will never be safe," and he is right, because no one in the West will admit that encouraging Muslim immigration into Europe was the worst thing that we could have done. We will have to feed and keep these men for the next 50-odd years. I did note, however, that the Daily Mail referred to a picture of the British National Party demonstrators and banners as the far-right EDL, when our logo was clearly visible. Don't they know the devil is in the detail? UK news. UK provides £6.5 million fees for 250,000 Zimbabwe pupils. At least 250,000 less privileged primary school children are set to benefit from a £6.5 million school fee support scheme unveiled by the British government. The money is in addition to an already existing £17.5 million offering by the UK towards government's basic education assistance module during the period 2012-2013. The £6.5 million grant, disbursed through the UK's Department for International Development, commences this March. The grant is a timely response to a recent appeal by the Zimbabwean government towards the funding of the benevolent scheme. The UK, through DFID, expects to invest some £420 million in the 4 years between 2011 and 2015 to help ensure that the poorest people in Zimbabwe have access to basic services such as education, health, water and sanitation, of which around £65 million will be in the education sector. President Robert Mugabe's government, a strong critic of British foreign policy towards Zimbabwe, recently swallowed its pride and extended a begging bowl to the former colonial master after nearly 1 million orphans and underprivileged children risked dropping out of primary education for non-payment of tuition. World at 8. I beg the question, why? Rhodesia is now independent. They've killed most of the white farmers and forced thousands of whites to leave. So why give them any money at all? We need this money over here to help the white Rhodesians, as they get no help at all from the UK governments when they have to come back to their mother country. What the hell? Vote approves visa-free travel to Europe for Emiratis. The European Parliament has voted overwhelmingly to allow visa-free travel for UAE citizens into Europe. UAE is of course the United Arab Emirates. Of the 577 members voting in Strasbourg on Thursday, 523 voted in favour of waiving visa requirements for Emiratis travelling to the 26 Schengen area states. The result was welcomed by UAE officials, who said it came as a result of years of efforts. and probably bribes. We'll become the first Arab country whose nationals are exempted from the Schengen visa, said Dr Anwar Gargash, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs. This will provide greater freedom of movement for our citizens. It's also backed visa-free travel for citizens of Colombia, Peru and 16 countries that are part of the Cotonou Agreement with the EU, mostly in the Caribbean and Pacific. Trade and investment between the UAE and the EU exceeded £50 billion, WAM reported. There were more than 160,000 EU citizens in the UAE and 1.64 million visitors in 2012. There are 508 weekly return flights between the UAE and Europe. World at 8. What the hell, just learned. The UK had already granted visa-free travel to UAE citizens in November. That's why there's so many of the buggers floating around London spending money, making Boris the Loris happy. European news. Empty property in EU could house all of Europe's homeless and more. Across the EU, enough houses are lying empty to house all of the EU's homeless people, according to British media. Insiders criticise that houses are increasingly being used as investment objects instead of as homes. If there were a way to open the doors of all the houses currently standing empty in the European Union to all of the continent's homeless, there would no longer be any homeless, and most of the houses would still be empty. That's according to shocking figures collated by Britain's Guardian newspaper, which suggests that there are more than 11 million vacant homes across the EU. The EU estimates the number of homeless people could be 4.1 million, which means that, in theory at least, every one of them could have more than one roof over their head. The Guardian says that 1.8 million homes are empty in Germany, but the situation is worse in Spain, where that figure shoots up to roughly 3.4 million, 14% of all properties in the country. The number of empty Spanish homes has risen by more than 10% in the past decade. 2 million houses are empty in Italy and around 700,000 in Britain. Portugal saw a 35% rise in vacant properties between the years 2001 and 2011, according to a 2011 census. More than 700,000 houses were empty there. World at 8. Trust the bloody Guardian, practically advertising for migrant squatters in the UK and Europe. What should happen is that if these absentee landlords don't want to rent out these houses, they should be made available to English homeless and young couples who have lost their homes. Otherwise it is open season on getting more immigrants in who will squat. Most of these off-site owners are foreign, so perhaps the question of being able to buy good properties and letting them go to rack and ruin and unoccupied should be taken up by Parliament. Germany sees threat from returning Syria militants. Germany faces an increasing threat of attack due to around a dozen German militants who have returned from the conflict in Syria with specialist knowledge of weapons and bomb making, German intelligence officers have said. Hans-Georg Maassen, head of Germany's Domestic Intelligence Service (BFV, said about 300 German citizens had left to join rebels fighting President Bashar al-Assad in Syria since the conflict began in 2011, and more than 20 had died there. We have knowledge of about a dozen people who were active in the conflict in Syria, and with this the threat of a terror attack in Germany increases, Maassen said. About 10% of those who have travelled to Syria are Muslim converts and about 7% women, the agency said. It said some 20 to 30 individuals had returned to Germany from the Middle East and were under surveillance. A dozen of these are deemed dangerous. About 2,000 people are believed to have left European states to head to Syria. Most joined the Nusra Front and the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, the two militant opposition groups that are closest to al-Qaeda and considered most dangerous by the West. British police have already arrested 16 people on suspicion of such offences this year, some as young as 17 compared to 24 such arrests in all of 2013. French woman given right to marry dead fiancé. A grieving French woman has been granted permission by the French president to marry her former fiancé, who tragically died in 2012, just a month before they were due to wed. The marriage is possible thanks to one of France's little-known laws. In a few weeks' time, a heartbroken French woman will stand alone before the mayor of her village for what will be an emotional ceremony, the likes of which are rarely seen. It was revealed this week that after an agonising wait for the woman, named only as Pascal, from the town of Saint-Omer in northern France, has finally been granted her long-standing wish by France's head of state to marry her former partner Michael posthumously. The pair, who were together for 6.5 years, were initially due to get married in June 2012, but just 1 month before the ceremony, Michael suffered a heart attack and died. Stricken with grief, Pascal vowed to carry on with her plans. Although he is gone, he is still my man, Pascal told France Television this week. She decided to make use of a little-known and seemingly strange French law that allows someone to marry a dead person in special circumstances. Pascal's job was to convince the President of France that hers was a special case, and that her love for Michael went beyond the grave. It took 4 letters to the President and 20 months of waiting, desperately hoping for a positive response. "I wrote with my heart, I went beyond just simple words, and it was accepted," she said. In a few weeks' time she will stand alone before the mayor of her town, with a photo of her former partner, in what will no doubt be an emotional ceremony. But despite the pain, she will be finally able to begin mourning. "I will be his wife, I will carry his name," she said. The legislation that allows posthumous marriages stems back to when a dam burst in 1959 and killed 420 people in southern France. A pregnant woman who had lost her fiancé was so upset, President Charles de Gaulle penned a law allowing them to be married. However, the authorities require proof the couple planned to marry before one of them died. Despite the legislation existing for many years, posthumous marriages in France are fairly rare events, with around 50 taking place each year. World at 8. Now call me cynical, but surely this helps with pensions, money and estates as well. After all, is it not only this country that insists on marriage certificates for death benefits and pensions, is it? There will be no report from the belly of the beast and Nick Griffin MEP today. He sends his apologies to our listeners, but he was on his way to a large nationalist meeting in Rome earlier today. World News. Nigeria's Boko Haram blamed for Adamawa killings. Suspected militant Islamists have killed at least 37 people during an assault on a town and nearby villages in northeastern Nigeria's Adamawa state, witnesses said. Banks, shops and houses were also looted and burnt during the 6-hour raid by militants armed with rocket-propelled grenades, they added. 6 of the militants were killed in a counter-offensive, the army said. The Islamic group Boko Haram is waging an insurgency in Nigeria. Thousands have been killed since the conflict started in 2009. On Thursday, France's President François Hollande pledged support for Nigeria in its fight against Boko Haram. It's curious that under an emergency rule, when security operatives are on red alert, this mayhem still persists. David Mark Senetti, President, "Your struggle is our struggle," he said at a security conference in the capital, Abuja. Witnesses told the BBC Hausa service that the victims were shot dead, others had their throats slit or were burnt in their homes. The attacks took place in the town of Michika, which has a population of several 100,000, and the villages of Shuwara and Kurchinka. Nigeria's Senate President David Mark described the assault as an open declaration of war, the Associated News Agency reports. Thought for the day. Cuckoos and Cloud Cuckoo land. Do you live there? You may wonder why I've used this title, and the reason will be apparent very soon. You've all heard of the cuckoo, a lovely bird with all the attitude of Attila the Hun on a very bad day. Now this bird lays her eggs in what is known as host nests. Thus, not the nest she'll be sitting on, but some other poor bird, usually much smaller, will be doing the honours. Now Edward Jenner, FRS, born May 17th, 1749, died January 26th, 1823, nationality English, not British, was a physician and scientist from Berkeley, Gloucestershire, who was the pioneer of smallpox vaccine and who, as an aside, has probably saved more lives for mankind than anyone else. He did research on this fascinating bird. It was thought that the cuckoo herself chucked out the host eggs or nestlings, but Edward Jenner found out that it was the baby cuckoo, when hatched, who chucked out any unhatched eggs. Also, this minute featherless intruder manoeuvred any unwary host hatchlings over the side of that nest to die. This having been accomplished, the baby cuckoo, who incidentally usually filled up the small nest of the host parents, He just sits there, huge and immovable, whilst the two host parents, bereft of their own offspring, fetch vast amounts of food to the ever-growing cuckoo, who, when it outgrows their nest, flies away without even a thank you or a box of chockies. Now there are similarities in this story of nature to the story of mankind, and in particular the UK today. My new name for immigrants is Cuckoos, and my name for the UK is Cloud Cuckoo Land. The situation is actually the same. We are the host nest to millions of cuckoos, who are in the process of outbreeding the host's babies in their nests. When ensconced in the host nests, they pull every trick in the book to make or pull in food from their newly adopted hosts to live, and when they've outgrown the host nest, they fly off to breed new cuckoos to inhabit more host nests in that region. Thus, so far, we have allowed these particular unfeathered and far from pretty cuckoos to inhabit our nests, land, towns, streets and cities, and not only give them pride of place over our own hatchlings and our fellow tribes, but hand them vast amounts of money, benefits, housing and services for which they do not pay and usually are not entitled, especially as they are intruders and not invited guests. And the final comparison to the cuckoo is that when they are replete, they leave the exhausted foster parents and fly off to do the whole thing again. Mate, supplant, kill, feed and fly. And we are the ones living in Cloud Cuckoo Land, with the vast majority of us Brits either not thinking at all about our cuckoos and the future of Cloud Cuckoo Land, or the rest actively working to put more cuckoos in host nests and promoting the whole ethos of the cuckoo throughout the land. Now the one thing the cuckoo does that is very clever and can be compared to our human cuckoos is that when the mother cuckoo lays her egg, she somehow makes them look like the host eggs, so the host bird doesn't know the difference, until she comes back and there is only one chicklet in the nest, the cuckoo, mouth open wide and give me, feed me, give me. The fact that the cuckoo chicklet eats 4 times as much as would the dead host babies is the telling factor, but one which even the host parents don't spot until too late. Thus it is costing Cloud Cuckoo Land vast amounts of money, even indirectly, to support massive immigration over the last 40 years. What we are not paying out in benefits, social housing, healthcare, education, we are paying out in rising house prices, food prices, criminal proceedings, prisons and taxes, because we do not manufacture anything really any longer that doesn't go to export for the final manufacturing results of foreign-made articles. Our farmers and fisheries have not only been decimated by nature this year, but also by our governments adopting EU rulings that have crippled our arable land. And yet we are still sending billions to foreign aid, demoting our armed forces and the plods, and paying the EU vast sums of money to finish us off. In truth, one of the largest cuckoos so far, even in the vast European Cloud Cuckoo Land. The crime rate in Cloud Cuckoo Land is rising, and the main protagonists, although rarely reported, are the cuckoos or their progeny, and this costs money from the host taxpayers. But it is the Muslims who are the largest group of cuckoos in this land. One prime example is Mohammed Aslam, and when I commented earlier this week on his house and how he got it, I had not done my research. Of course he has a nice house. We the British paid him £1 million for his trauma in Guantanamo in 2010. King Cuckoo! For any would-be sympathisers, no one gets to go into Guantanamo unless there is a very good reason, and now it has been proved that the host country of this particular nasty cocky cuckoo was wrong to pay out. But is there any chance of this being rescinded or Beg being fined for leading the establishment astray? I think £1 million would do just fine for our food banks. Because of course living in Cloud Cuckoo Land and feeding intruder cuckoos instead of our own means that food banks are de rigueur now in many parts of this country. A disgusting failure to be brought to the doors of any country, let alone a country which still insists on paying out for millions of cuckoos whilst beggaring itself to do so. When will we stop being hosts for uninvited guests with huge appetites, not only for producing their own kind, but for diminishing their host parents and country, and still, from time to time, flying back to their own nests. When will we stop living in Cloud Cuckoo land? And finally, pest control, a 2-for-1. A woman was having a passionate affair with an inspector from a pest control company. One afternoon they were carrying on in the bedroom together when her husband arrived home unexpectedly. "Quick," said the woman to the lover, "into the closet," and she pushed him in the closet stark naked. The husband, however, became suspicious and after a search of the bedroom discovered the man in the closet. "Who are you?" he asked him. "I'm an inspector from Bugs Be Gone," said the exterminator. "What are you doing in there?" the husband asked. "I'm investigating a complaint about an infestation of moths," the man replied. "And where are your clothes?" asked the husband. The man looked down at himself and said, "Those little bastards." And not to be beaten, a mortgage joke. For his birthday, little Joseph asked for a 10-speed bicycle. His father said, "Son, we'd give you one, but the mortgage on this house is £280,000 and your mother has just lost her job. There's no way we can afford it." The next day the father saw little Joseph heading out the front door with a suitcase. So he asked, "Son, where are you going?" Little Joseph told him, "I was walking past your room last night and heard you telling Mum you were pulling out. Then I heard her tell you to wait because she was coming too. And I'll be damned if I'm staying here by myself with a £280,000 mortgage and no bloody bike." A little boy after my own heart, bless him. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy, safe and dry weekend. School fee support scheme unveiled by the British government. The money is in addition to an already existing £17.5 million offering by the UK towards government's basic education assistance module during the period 2012-2013. The £6.5 million grant disbursed through the UK's Department for International Development commences this March. The grant is a timely response to a recent appeal by the Zimbabwean government towards the funding of the benevolent scheme. The UK approves visa-free travel to Europe for Emiratis. Empty property in EU could house all of Europe's homeless and more. Germany sees threat from returning Syria militants. French woman wins right to marry dead fiancé. Nigeria's Boko Haram blamed for Adamawa killings. Thought for the day, Cuckoos and Cloud Cuckoo land, do you live there? And finally, Friday 2-for-1 day, pest control and mortgages. Now before the news, a comment on the sentencing of the two cretinous Muslim killers of young Lee Rigby. Michael Adebolajo, 29, will die in jail after being given a whole life sentence, while Michael Adebowale, 22, was sentenced to life with a minimum of 45 years. The one wrong thing Judge Sweeney said was that they had betrayed Islam, and the one thing that these two horrendously badly behaved men said was that it was not a betrayal of Islam, and it was not. That act was Islamic, tooth and claw, and in its fundamental form, in the hands of radicalised idiots out of their own country and culture. Referring to Britain, Adebowale screamed, "You and America will never be safe," and he is right, because no one in the West will admit that encouraging Muslim immigration into Europe was the worst thing that we could have done. We will have to feed and keep these men for the next 50-odd years. I did note, however, that the Daily Mail referred to a picture of the British National Party demonstrators and banners as the far-right EDL, when our logo was clearly visible. Don't they know the devil is in the detail? UK news. UK provides £6.5 million fees for 250,000 Zimbabwe pupils. At least 250,000 less privileged primary school children are set to benefit from a £6.5 million.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 28th of February 2014. UK provides £6.5 million fees for 250,000 Zimbabwe pupils. Ah, what the hell, voter